Hey, thanks for joining me. In today's video, we're going to take a look at this RockPower 300 by Rockpals. This is a 300 watt power station, sometimes also referred to as a solar generator because you can charge it via solar panel is one of the many ways that you can charge it. And we're going to find out how it stacks up in terms of build quality, performance, and price compared to some of its competitors. So let's jump right in and take a look. So about a year ago, I did a review on the Jackery Explorer 1000, which is a much bigger solar generator than this guy here. In fact, I have it sitting right here. It is a bit of a beast, as you can see. And after I posted this in the weeks and months as this video has been up, and I've gotten quite a few comments on it, people have said, hey, this thing is probably a bit overkill, don't you think, for what you were using it for? And basically that's car camping, where I'm basically charging my watch, a couple of phones, I'm recharging my drone batteries, maybe my camera batteries, and I'm also at some point running, if it's cold out, running an electric blanket for really about an hour, maybe an hour and a half tops. And the reality of it is I really typically wasn't knocking this down more than about 25 or 30% of its total capacity at any given night. So it's a fair point that this is probably a bit overkill for what I've been using it for. And so when the folks at Rockpals reached out to me a few weeks ago and said, hey, would you consider reviewing the Rockpals 300? I thought, well, this might be something people are interested in. And in addition to that, I kind of wanted to know for myself, is this something that actually would fit the use case that I typically am using this thing in, which is car camping? And it's not like I'm cooking with this thing or anything like that. So really just recharging my devices every night. And so I wanted to find out if this would be sufficient for that particular use. And I thought I'd bring you along for the ride. It's not really a fair comparison to compare this to the 1000. Jackery does make an E300, which directly competes with this guy. So right off the bat, the Jackery products and most of the other products on the market really are selling these things at about $1 a watt. It's pretty consistent. So the 300 from Jackery is $300. The Rockpals 300 guy that we have here typically is around $285, so just a little bit less expensive. But there's also, as I have just recently found, a coupon for this thing on Amazon. It takes the price down, I think, to around $210, which makes it a significant lower price than, say, the Jackery E300. And I believe the Rockpals folks are going to give me a discount code, which I can put in the description below. So look, if you want to check that out, if you're interested in seeing what this costs with that discount code, I'll put a link to that in the description so you can check that out as well. So this thing has the potential to be very much less expensive than the Jackery version. So now the question is, how does it stack up in terms of performance and construction? So based on the construction, I can tell you, I've had this thing for about 2 weeks now, and it is, I feel, every bit as sturdy construction as the Jackery. That was a big selling point for me on the Jackery. It just felt like a quality piece of hardware. And this, frankly, does too. I mean, the plastic and the handle on top, everything just feels like you can just tell this is not thin plastic. This is really robust, kind of ruggedized housing. And the buttons have that nice tactile feel, and the display is virtually not identical, but virtually the same functionality as what you get on something like the E300 or the 1000 for that matter. So from a construction standpoint, I have to say I'm very impressed with how this E300 is built. It does not feel cheap at all, despite its low cost. From a weight standpoint, this thing is a little over 7.5 pounds. The Jackery version is just a little bit lighter than that. It's just a hair over 7 pounds. And they both use the MPPT charge controller, which is the higher end charge controller technology out there. And they also both output pure sine wave through the AC inverter. Now, in terms of outputs, the Rockpals has a single 3-prong AC plug versus the Jackery, which has 2 instead of just 1. But the Rockpals has 4 USB connectors, whereas the Jackery only has 3. So you can kind of see this thing is kind of geared, and I think appropriately so, since it's a 300 watt unit, geared toward more USB connections. Now, in particular, this has a quick charge 3.0 connector, 2 standard Type A USB connectors, and a Type-C power delivery port. And I believe that Jackery also has a power delivery port. So in that sense, they're very similar. You just get an extra USB connection here, which is important to me because I can use all the USB connections possible, really. Now we also got a 12 volt connector for any 12-volt devices that you might want to power off this. So especially like a car refrigerator. I'll get more into that particular use case in a second. Let's talk about the ways that you can recharge this thing. Now, obviously, you can plug this thing into a wall. It does come with a 72-watt AC adapter that you can plug in and power this thing. One thing to be aware, though, the pass-through charging on this. So, in other words, when you're charging with the AC adapter, which I've got right here, if I plug this in at the top, I'm still able to charge my camera batteries and anything here on the 12-volt side or anything on the USB stack. So it's basically anything that's DC charging. I'm able to continue to do pass-through charging. You cannot get AC power while you're charging the unit. Feel free to leave a comment in the comments below if you know differently, but I believe the Jackery does allow you to pass through both AC and DC. So that is one difference that I would take into account. Now, in terms of recharge times, I noticed there's kind of a big difference between how Rockpals markets their recharge times versus how Jackery does it. And in particular, Jackery's numbers look like they are way better on recharge times than what you would see on Rockpal's site. And the reason for that is twofold. There's actually a little footnote on the recharge times on the Jackery website, which tells you that these recharge times are from 20% battery back to 100, not to 0 or 10, but 20%. And so, of course, it's going to be a little quicker from 20% to 100. Rockpal's numbers are from 10% back to 100, and that is because the Rockpals shuts down at 10% to save the battery, to preserve the battery life. So, and also, I've noticed that the Rockpals numbers tend to be actually higher than what I actually get when I did the test. So the numbers that I'm going to give you here are the numbers that I actually got when I was testing this unit. So when you're recharging with the included AC adapter by itself, you're going to get about 4 hours total recharge time from when this thing shuts itself down to when it's back up to 100%. So roughly 4 hours. If you are charging this with a 100-watt solar panel, you might be able to charge this as quick as about 3.5 hours, but it's really going to depend on how much sun you have and how efficient your solar panel is. So the charge time is really not super, for solar panels, you really can't nail that down because it really depends. Under the optimal conditions, you could get around 3.5 hours recharge time with a 100-watt solar panel. With a 12-volt car adapter, and it does ship with a 12-volt car adapter, you're going to be looking at somewhere around 6 to 7 hours to recharge this thing from empty or 10% back up to full. If you want to charge this with the USB-C power delivery connector that I mentioned down there, that's going to take you around 7 hours because it's only a 30-watt connection. But here's a nice little trick. If you take the power supply that comes on the AC power supply that it ships with, and you plug that in, you'll see up here that I'm getting, when this comes all the way up, I'm getting 69 watts input.
Nice.
But I can also, at the same time, connect to the PD Type-C port as long as you have a PD-compatible adapter. So if I plug this guy in to the Type-C port, now I'm charging at almost 100 watts. This will allow me to charge the thing in 3 hours. Oh, I also wanted to point out another trick that you can do that's not listed on Rockpal's website, but the trick of running it off the power delivery port and the AC adapter at the same time, you can do that with the 12-volt charging from your car. If you have two 12-volt ports in your car, and I do, you can connect the 12-volt adapter up to it and charge it that way. And then you can also then charge through the Type-C power delivery port if you get an adapter for your other 12-volt port that gives you PD power out of this. So that, I wasn't sure if that would work or not, but as it turns out, it actually does work because I tested it. Now, in terms of performance, 1 hour of electric blanket use on this thing at level 4, and this is again how I tested it with the original Explorer 1000. Now that only drains the battery for an hour to about 15% of the total capacity. So if it's at 100, it'll take you down to 85% for each hour that you run that particular electric blanket. Whenever you plug in a device on the Rockpals 300 that draws more than about 100 watts, you'll hear a fan kick on. It's not very loud, but it's noticeable. And if you're a light sleeper, it's something you should probably be aware of. And I think this is going to be common to any units in that 300 watt range. You can see on the decibel meter here that it's around 70 decibels approximately, which is fairly quiet. If you can imagine somebody turning on the shower in the next room, you might hear the shower running in the room next to you. That's kind of how loud the fan is. It's not really a big deal, but it is noticeable. Now, something else that you can run off this thing, you wouldn't think so because it's a smaller unit, but like an Alpicool or maybe a Dometics, a 12 volt refrigerator, these things generally pull about 45 watts when the compressor is running. And the website, again, this is one of those cases where Rockpals sort of undersells itself. Rockpals says that these little refrigerators can run for about 5 or 6 hours, kind of depending on the cool setting. And the reality of it is these things generally don't run the compressor all the time, especially if you're just using it in refrigeration mode and not freezer mode. But in its standard refrigeration mode, where you're just kind of keeping your stuff cool like you normally would, the compressor only runs about 9 minutes out of every hour. So when you do the math on that, you can easily get over 24 hours to up to maybe 36 hours, depending on how you have the cooling level set, just because the compressor doesn't run on those things continuously. So for me, the takeaway in all this is that yes, something in the 300 watt size does actually work for how I use this thing. I'm able to charge both me and my wife's cell phone. I'm charging my GoPro, I'm charging my camera batteries, I'm charging my drone battery, and then my drone controller. And it's covering all the bases. And I really didn't have to spend $1,000 on that Jackery Explorer 1000. This Rockpals RockPower 300 really kind of has me covered for the things that I use it for. So yeah, I'm pretty impressed. So hopefully you found some of the information in there useful. If in fact you did, please consider giving us a thumbs up. I would really appreciate that. And hopefully we'll see you in the next one. And until then, have fun out there.